So we started a new series of talks last week called The Heart of Buddhism, the beating heart of Buddhism. And we're focusing on the Bodhisattva ideal and a list. Buddhism's full of lists, and a really useful list called the Paramitas, which is how we train in the Bodhisattva ideal. I'm going to say much more. Satyajyoti gave a brilliant talk last week, which you can catch on YouTube, just evoking what the Bodhisattva ideal is. And I'm going to say more about it shortly. But yeah, you could, Sangha has said, and you could very much see that the Bodhisattva ideal is the heart of Buddhism in lots of different ways. It's the heart in that it's the core, the essence of the teaching of Buddhism. So it's the heart of the teaching. But also, in a way, as an antidote to kind of dry analytical ideas, the Bodhisattva ideal is the emotional counterpart to it. It's the altruism, the compassion. It's the heart of Buddhism in that respect. But also it's a glimpse into the heart of a Buddha, the heart of an enlightened being, the awakened heart. The Bodhisattva ideal gives us a glimpse into what that heart might be like and a way to participate in that. So I'll hopefully say more about that as well. But as a kind of teaser towards what might come later in the talk, I just want to show a few images of some people who will appear later in the talk. They will crop up. So the title of the talk is "When I Give Myself." And so I'll just explain why that's the title of the talk, and then we'll have a look at a couple of people who've given themselves. So this title, "When I Give Myself," comes from a poem from Walt Whitman, which Sangha quotes when he talks about Dharma in this talk, The 10 Pillars of Buddhism. And in the poem, The Leaves of Grass, Walt Whitman says, "Behold, I do not give lectures or a little charity. When I give myself." And Sangha says, this is the heart of generosity. This is the heart of Dharma. And this evening's talk is about Dharma, not the cafe in Crooks, which is a great cafe, Dharma Cafe, but Dharma generosity, Dharma paramita, the perfection of generosity. And you could say Dharma is the heart of Buddhism. Dharma is the heart of the Bodhisattva ideal. And you could say the heart of Buddhism is that when I give myself. When a Bodhisattva gives, they give themselves. So this evening I want to focus later on two people. So this is a photo of Sangha and a close friend of his teacher Dada Rinpoche. And Sangha regarded Dada Rinpoche as a living Bodhisattva. Of all the people he met, he thought Dada Rinpoche was a highly developed being, a living Bodhisattva, an example of somebody with this awakened heart, the heart of a Buddha. And we'll see later how he really gave himself. Dada Rinpoche really gave himself. But there's a connection with Sheffield because we have a stupa in our remembrance garden with relics of Dada Rinpoche. So Sheffield has a powerful connection to Dada Rinpoche. And then there's another person who gave himself. That's a photo of Dada Rinpoche again. And here's a photo of Susiddhi. So Susiddhi is the first chairman of Sheffield and an incredibly generous man. And he very much gave himself to this situation in ways that we'll hear about later, but in ways that we're really benefiting from now. And again, some of Susiddhi's ashes are in our stupa in the garden. So do go to the remembrance garden and take that in. And later you'll hear more about these two great men, great beings. But before we do that, we're going to hear a short story. And it's a story about a figure from the 8th century of Buddhism from India called Subukhu. And we can turn the picture off now, if that's okay. We'll see Susiddhi again later. So Subukhu, this has taken us back in time to the 8th century, to India, to a great university, a monastic university of Buddhism with thousands of people, thousands of monks studying Buddhism, practicing Buddhism, a culture that had been developed for 1,000 years or more after the life of the Buddha. So it's a great university called Nalanda University. Very, very famous. It's in ruins now. You can visit the ruins. Pilgrims from Sheffield have been to visit Nalanda. But there's a story that's very, very famous that's connected to the Bodhisattva ideal about a character called Subukhu. And Subukhu was a monk, and Subukhu wasn't his name, but that's a nickname that the other monks had given to him. and it means eats, sleeps, poos. That's what Subuku meant, because that's all he seemed to do. This other monk never showed up. When there was teachings taking place, Subuku was never there. When they were doing the work and the chores, Subuku wasn't there. All he seemed to do was to turn up for the meals and then sleep. So they gave him this kind of bit of a mean nickname, Subuku, eats, sleeps, poos, which kind of shows what the monks were like, actually. They kind of, they're not all highly developed beings, and they had some fun, I guess, as well, and some banter, some teasing. But there would be great occasions where monks would be asked to give discourses, to give talks in front of the whole monastery, like thousands of an audience of thousands. So I'm a bit nervous today about giving this talk, but if you imagine like Narland University, thousands of people, and some of the people involved in deciding thought, let's ask Subuku to give the talk. This is going to be funny. We'll ask Subuku to give the talk. This is going to be a bit of a lesson for him, that he doesn't come to the lessons, he doesn't come to the chores. Let's make him give the address to people. So Subuku agreed and turned up to give the address. And what happened was astonishing. Subuku gave this amazing discourse on Buddhism, without stopping, without pausing. This discourse on the heart of Buddhism, the Bodhisattva ideal. This particular approach to Buddhism, which you could say is the heart of Buddhism, and he gave a complete, perfect discourse on it, what it is, how to practice it, and then, I mean, there's kind of legends and myths associated. It's said that towards the end of the discourse, he started to vanish, to disappear, and they could still hear his voice giving the discourse, but he kind of floated or kind of levitated off somewhere into space, and wasn't seen for some time, apparently. So I don't know what to make of that part of it. But what we are left with is a text called the Bodhicharyavatara, the Guide to the Bodhisattva Path, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, by Shantideva. So Shantideva is Subuku. And so this text, this great discourse, was apparently recorded, written down, captured, and has become a seminal, really classic, important text that is studied in Buddhism. And you could say it's a fantastic discourse on the heart of Buddhism, the Bodhisattva path. And this is what we're going to be looking at over the coming weeks. We're going to be looking at chapters and some verses from this text, because he goes into detail about the paramitas, and the paramitas are a list of 6 ways that you can practice to develop this heart of a Buddha, the heart of Buddhism, and in particular to become a bodhisattva. So we've got the bodhisattva ideal, we've got paramitas, we've got Shantideva and his text, the Bodhicharyavatara. So what is a bodhisattva? So what is the heart of Buddhism? Well, a bodhisattva has seen into reality, has seen into the insubstantial, impermanent nature of all things. In this form of Buddhism, it's called shunyata. They've seen the way things are. They've had a vision, a glimpse of reality, and as a result of that, their heart pours out with love for all beings. They feel a deep sense of connection with all beings and compassion as a result of this. And it's said that a bodhisattva has their consciousness has kind of gone beyond the ordinary consciousness that we experience, and they live for awakening. They're somebody in whom this heart has arisen. They long to be enlightened, and they live for that, but not just for themselves. They long and they live for enlightenment for all beings. They care deeply about the suffering of other beings, and they live to alleviate the suffering of all beings. And this is a radically different kind of state that we would ordinarily live in and dwell in. So a bodhisattva lives to liberate beings from suffering. And you could say that the attitude of the bodhisattva is summed up by generosity. And Satyajyoti again gave a beautiful talk about this last week. But the attitude of a bodhisattva is no longer what can I get out of life, what can I get out of a situation, but what can I give? What can I give to others? What can I contribute? What can I, how can I alleviate suffering? What can I give? So we're going to be looking at this, this list of the paramitas, and paramita is can be translated as ways to go beyond. So a bodhisattva has gone beyond this kind of the usual experience of a divided self and world, me and here, me at the center of the universe, me as number one, and everybody else as being separate. A bodhisattva no longer experiences the world like that. They've gone beyond that. They've transcended that experience of the world. And the paramitas are both a description of how the bodhisattva would live and experience things, and a very sublime list, a very sublime kind of ideal. But they're very, very practical. The thing is, they're ways that we can train right here and now to become just a little bit more like that, to have a little bit more like that attitude. And it's said that the bodhisattva dwells in bliss. The bodhisattva lives in a state of joy and bliss. So for them, living to help other people doesn't feel like a chore. It doesn't feel like a dour duty or responsibility. It's play. It's described as play. Their attitude to life is very, very playful, and they experience joy and bliss. And Satyajyoti evoked last week how the opposite of that, when we live for ourselves in this kind of selfish, self-centered state that a lot of people dwell in, it creates suffering. It creates a cramped existence. It's not a pleasant way to live. And the more we practice in this way, the more we practice Buddhism in a way, the more we practice, our orientation starts to shift towards others. We start to focus more on others and less on ourselves, and we become happier. It's almost counterintuitive, but it's magical. We become happier the more we start to focus on others and less on ourselves. So we can train in the paramitas, these 6 ways to go beyond. And this is what we'll be looking at in the coming weeks. And tonight we're going to look at the first of the paramitas, which is giving, generosity, dharma. And what to say? Well, I'd like to say, I think that this state, I'll say a little bit about this. In his series on the Bodhisattva ideal, Sangha describes the heart of a bodhisattva, the heart of an enlightened being. It's got a particular term in Mahayana Buddhism, the bodhicitta, the heart of awakening. And it's said that when this arises in somebody, they become a bodhisattva. They experience this compassion for beings, this longing to awaken. But the experience is said to be as though something external has arisen within you. It doesn't seem like it's an ordinary state. It feels like it's something kind of, Shantideva describes it as being, it's taken possession of his ordinary, small, selfish mind. Something amazing has arisen within it, something that feels completely different. And it's as though we can create the conditions through our practice for that to arise within us. But it's even described, Sangha in his lectures describes it as a force in the universe, a force for good in the universe that's trying to awaken in beings, trying to awaken. And we create the conditions through our practice for that to awaken within our hearts. That might sound a bit weird and a bit unattractive potentially. I love it. I love that. I love the idea of that I can practice in a way that I can align myself with something very, very positive in the universe that wants beings to wake up, wants beings to grow. And through my practice, I can align myself with that, and that can manifest through me and through our community that we practice. I find that really, really inspiring. And if you don't worry. That sounds a bit kind of strange. Don't worry, because you can also experience this as just like a seed of enlightenment, that if you create the right conditions can flourish. It's already there. The potential is already there within you for this compassion, this wisdom. You create the right conditions and it can flourish within you. Okay, so let's look at the practice of generosity. How do we practice generosity? What is it? Why do we practice it? And how do we practice it? And then I want to look a bit about the ideal state of the Bodhisattva's practice of generosity, and then bring it back down to earth again a bit more with like, well, what are the next steps? How could we practice it in our lives? Maybe in the weeks to come, how could we practice generosity? So why is generosity the first on the list? It's the first of this list of paramitas. And I was saying it's like, you could say it's the heart of Buddhism, because it's the essence of the attitude of a bodhisattva, that they want to give themselves, they want to give to other beings. When this heart has arisen within you, you want to give. And if you're going to try and cultivate that kind of heart, if you're going to try and cultivate that kind of practice, that kind of approach to life and to enlightenment, well, this generosity is the ideal way to lift you out of that kind of cramped state of a selfish, self-centered existence. Generosity immediately lifts you out of that, and it connects you with other people. And generosity creates a sense of abundance. It's counterintuitive because you can feel people often don't want to give because they feel a sense of lack. I can't give because I haven't got enough. I can't give to other people. But counterintuitively, it's a bit like magic. When you start to give to other people, you feel rich. You feel so rich. You you experience beauty and richness, abundance, and you're lifted out of a sense of poverty and lack. So it's magical. Generosity creates a sense of abundance. It frees us from this mentality of poverty. And it's incredibly beautiful. Generosity is incredibly beautiful. It creates an atmosphere which can pervade hopefully our Sangha, our community. We try and build this community on generosity, and it creates a very, very beautiful, powerful atmosphere. So how can we train in Dharma? What is it? How can we train in it? Well, there's a traditional list of things that you can give, ways that you can give. And I've been talking in kind of very ideal kind of exalted states about generosity and bodhisattvas, but actually this list is just a very, very practical list that we can all do. Generosity is something we can all do. I think Dada Rinpoche will talk about later. It's what once said: if you don't know what to do, just help somebody else. Just give. If you can't think what to do, just give. Everybody can give something from this list. So the obvious things you can give are possessions. You can give stuff. You can give material things and money to other people, and that makes a big difference. And our centre runs on that. People give standing orders. That pays the cost of living expenses of the people that work here. And you can give. You give stuff to people, it benefits them, you share with them, you can give them money. But maybe something that we can see that we seem to lack in our current society is time. That's the second on the list. Maybe this is more difficult to give. Can you give somebody your time and your energy when they need it? Can you help them out? Can you just make space available to give your time and your energy to them, your attention to them, to help them out? And then the third way we can give and help people, we can give our skills, we can share our skills with other people, our knowledge and our experience with them. And again, we could feel like tight-fisted or kind of ungenerous about that. Particularly, I was thinking of friends who work in academia, and they said actually like it can be a bit cutthroat, a bit competitive, but the idea that you just freely give your knowledge and your skills to benefit people can seem counterintuitive, perhaps. The fourth one I really like: you can give other people fearlessness. And this, something that our society is beset by is anxiety and stress, worry. You can be in a situation where people are anxious and worried, and maybe at the moment a lot of people are anxious and worried, and it can be very, very powerful if somebody isn't. When you're in that situation, if you're calm, if you can stay calm, if you're positive, if you're confident, that is contagious. Anxiety and stress can be contagious, but also calm and courage, confidence can be contagious. So you might have experienced somebody like that who can be a bit of a rock, or somebody you can lean on and take confidence from. So this is something you might not have considered before, but you can give the gift of fearlessness, the gift of confidence and positivity. And then in this traditional list, the most important thing you could give to people is the Dharma. You can share somebody the Dharma with them, and that can transform their life. So traditionally in Buddhism, the most precious thing you could give to somebody would be the Dharma. So later on in your groups, you might be considering what other ways that I can give. In the week to come, is there one of these that I can give in a situation in my life? Can I think of a situation in my life? Can I give somebody time? Are there some skills? Actually, I'm just looking at Darren, who sat on the second row, and just before Christmas, he shared his skills with me. He cleaned my gutters on his very high ladders with his just for free, basically, because he could, and I needed it. And just things like that make a massive difference if somebody shares their skills or their experience, their time with you. So think, in the week ahead, how can you do this? Is there a situation you can do this? Can you give to somebody? Okay. Yeah. So we can practice generosity, we can cultivate generosity, and it's magical. When we do, we feel lifted out of this prison of self-centeredness. We feel connected with other people, and we feel abundance. We feel rich. And there's an image of generosity that evokes some of that, a symbol of generosity, which is the Buddha Ratnasambhava. So we'll just have a little look at the Buddha Ratnasambhava, please. Hopefully the next image. So Ratnasambhava is a golden Buddha, and he's associated with generosity. Just what a lovely image to look at. Actually, this is a painting by Arloka. And at a time of winter when there's no flowers, actually I saw a tree in flower today. I don't know if it was out of season, but I was walking up Northumberland Road and a cherry tree had broken into blossom, and I just had to stop and look at it for a good few minutes. And just looking at this image, all these flowers, all this abundance, it just evokes beauty and abundance. And so there's two things to draw out from this image of Ratnasambhava. One is the gesture of giving. His hand is open. So it's said that the opposite of generosity is to be tight-fisted. We talk about being tight-fisted in our culture, don't we? And it's said that somebody who doesn't share the Dharma, someone who knows the Dharma and doesn't share it, has the tight fist of a bad teacher. So the opposite is to freely give, and Ratnasambhava's hand is open, and it's coming out of this heart of love and compassion. The sense of deep connection with all beings is an open-handed generosity, an open-handed, freely given. So that's the gesture of generosity, the open hand. But also, he is the Buddha of the jewel family, so he holds a jewel in his hand. And there's all these images of abundance. So Ratnasambhava evokes that state of mind where you freely give, and the richness and the sense of abundance that state of mind brings. So that is an enlightened depiction of this state of generosity, the embodiment of generosity. And I want to go back to the two people I introduced you to at the start of the talk. I want to talk about Dada Rinpoche and Susiddhi again, because what wasn't on the list, but what I talked about at the start of the talk, is that a bodhisattva goes beyond those things, and from their attitude and their wisdom, they want to give themselves. They want to give, in a way, their life to other beings and benefit them in whatever way they can, particularly around sharing the Dharma with them. So Dada Rinpoche was one of Sangha Rakshita's teachers, and he, as I mentioned earlier, Sangha Rakshita regarded Dada Rinpoche as a living bodhisattva, somebody who had this heart of Buddhism, the heart of a Buddha. Have we got an image of Dada Rinpoche, please? So maybe if we go forwards, we might have... There we are. This is Dada Rinpoche as an old man. We saw Dada Rinpoche earlier as a young man. So a little bit about the story of Dada Rinpoche. He was in the Tibetan tradition, he was a tulku. A tulku is a rebirth of a highly revered teacher. And so Dada Rinpoche was a tulku. He was, as a child, regarded as being the next incarnation of a series of Dada Rinpoches. I think he was like number 11 or number 12 of this kind of series of Dada Rinpoches. And he was identified by, well, it's a fascinating story which you can read about in these books. I really highly recommend reading about Dada Rinpoche. It's amazing. They kind of recognized him as a child. And he said to his mother, "Oh, they're coming to get me." He was in this tiny village in the east of Tibet. "Oh, these people are coming to get me, to take me to my monastery," when he's kind of 3 or 4. But when he taught, he died in 1990, and he was a teacher of Sangha Rakshita, and some order members went to visit him while he was still alive. And what he said to them was really interesting. He said, "Well, when I was young, I didn't feel like a Rinpoche. I didn't feel like a tulku. But I could see that other people needed me to be one." So he practiced and lived so that he could become one. And by the end of his life, he certainly appears to have been a Rinpoche, a highly revered person. But he didn't feel like that when he was born, and he practiced, which is a really important message. And he decided to give his life to that because that's what was needed. What's remarkable about Dada Rinpoche is a really highly revered teacher, but he found himself through politics and circumstance destitute. When Tibet was invaded by China, he fled along with lots of other people and found himself in a village called Kalimpong on the border with Tibet and India in the Himalayas. And that's where Sangha Rakshita was based. That's where they became friends. That's where he met them. But Dada Rinpoche, his response to the situation was he looked around and saw the suffering. He saw that there were a lot of orphan children, and he decided to set up a school. He set up an orphanage and a school, and he devoted the next part of his life very kind of in living in kind of poverty and destitution, just to look after these orphan children. And it's a very inspiring life that he led. And it was a life of somebody who was a bodhisattva, who was devoted to awakening and devoted to caring, loved other beings and was devoted to caring for them. And his daily routine, in Suvadra's story, his account of Dada Rinpoche, his daily routine is extraordinary. It said that Dada Rinpoche would wake up at 4 o'clock every day and do a series of meditations for about 6 hours. He would practice and reflect on the Dharma every day to prepare for his day. So you could see how, like, his focus on awakening, his focus on enlightenment, just every day he did practiced from 4 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock. And then at 10 o'clock, he just worked in the school. He gave himself to the school and did whatever was needed, whether it was administrative work, teaching. He would fix things and repair things. Console children that were upset, and teach them Sanskrit or Tibetan. And then after his evening meal, he would then meditate again and perform devotional practices, pujas, until the early hours of the morning, and would have very little sleep. And he just repeated this every day. And this is an image of him taken in his school by an order member who went to visit him. And you can see, like, he's just living with very little possessions. But with a sense of abundance and joy. Apparently, again, a very, very playful man, but lived with a sense of abundance and joy. So he gave himself, he gave his life. So it's a very exalted, but an ordinary human example of somebody who gave himself. It's a generosity that's gone beyond. It's a generosity that's gone beyond. And then we have Dada Rinpoche's relics in Sheffield. So Sheffield's Buddhist Centre has a connection with Dada Rinpoche, but much more down to earth. And is Sue Siddhi. So if we go back to the image of Sue Siddhi again, Sue Siddhi, as I mentioned, was the first chairman in Sheffield, but he was ordained in 1979 by Sangha Rakshita, and he's Scottish, so I don't think he liked the Bodhisattva ideal very much. I think he was a kind of Protestant Bodhisattva, kind of more kind of less kind of joy and kind of like. But he was somebody who just excelled in generosity. But in a way, I think it was very, very humble, and nobody knew about it. I knew him for many years and didn't know about how generous he'd been in his life, which I found after he died. He died in about 5 or 6 years ago. And it was only when he was coming towards the end of his life and after he died, I heard so many stories of his generosity. It was amazing. So to begin with, when he was becoming ill and needed to go into a nursing home, we put out an appeal to raise some money to pay towards his fees. And within 24 hours, I'd raised much, much more than we needed to raise for his fees. And I got loads and loads of stories back about how generous Sue Siddy had been, which I didn't know about. One example was an order member called Vidya Mala, who is quite famous now and set up Breathworks and lives in Manchester. She started off in Sheffield, and at the time didn't have any money to send presents back to her family in New Zealand. And she emailed and sent some money and said, well, when I was in Sheffield, Sue Siddy heard about this and he followed me. He took me to town shopping and just followed me around the shops and paid for all the presents so I could send them back to New Zealand. So just really kind of lots of small examples of Sue Siddy's generosity, but then some very, very big ones as well. So before he was in Sheffield, Sue Siddy lived in Scotland and helped to set up 2 Buddhist centres. So the Glasgow Buddhist Centre was being founded and they'd run out of money. And Sue Siddy apparently sold his flat that he had in Edinburgh and used the proceeds to pay for the Buddhist Centre in Glasgow and to pay for the Buddhist Centre in Edinburgh. Amazing. And the people, like so many people, have benefited from those 2 Buddhist centres. And it was, I think, it was out of just love of Buddhism, his love of Buddhism and his desire to make that available for people at a time when there was very, very little Buddhism in the UK. He poured his money into that. And then he answered the call to come to Sheffield when Sheffield needed a chairman. This was in the mid-80s, and it was with Amoga Vangsa, who's here this evening, and Punyamala and Advaya Chitta, kind of heroes of the Sheffield Sangha who have given their lives. Lots of heroes who were benefiting from them having given their lives to establishing this Sangha in Sheffield. But Amoga Vangsa might correct me a bit later, but the version I've heard is that at the first kind of council meeting of the trustees, Sue Siddy realised that there wasn't much money, there wasn't any money, and he was probably the only person who could earn money. He was qualified as a pharmacist, but had kind of stopped doing that for some years. So he went back to retrain as a pharmacist, and got a job at a pharmacy in Parsons Cross. And he sold his car to donate the money to the Buddhist Centre and would catch 2 buses every day to Parsons Cross to work in a pharmacy. And it wasn't a very pleasant environment to work in. And the money he earned, he funded people to teach Buddhism and a community in Crooks, in Crooksmoor Road, the first building that we owned. A few years later, we sold that building and used the money to buy this Buddhist Centre. So in effect, he'd through his generosity, funded 3 different Buddhist centres in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Sheffield. So an incredible amount. And I didn't know any. I knew him. I used to meet with him every week for lunch, and he'd make me peanut butter on kind of crackers, and I'd have a Kit Kat, and in a very kind of minimal chat. And all this stuff, I didn't know any of it until after he died. All this stuff. So that's something else about generosity, the attitude of generosity. We're not looking to get anything out of it, especially generosity, the perfection of generosity is where we just give because we want to, out of love, because we want to benefit other people, not because we want people to know about it, because we want praise, because we want to look good. Sue Siddy didn't seem to mind that nobody knew about all this generosity. That didn't motivate him. He was motivated just to give. So amazing man, and someone that each of us are benefiting from because we've had access to this Sangha, to this building. So I like to tell Sue Siddy's story. I haven't done it I told it recently on the Sangha weekend retreat, and I thought it's an opportunity to tell people about Sue Siddy this evening. So Sue Siddy died about 6 years ago, and we've got some of his ashes in our remembrance garden. So there, we've seen Ratnasambhava, who's an archetypal Buddha of generosity. And we've heard about two human beings, like, ordinary human beings like us, but who have lived lives where they've given themselves to other people. And again, that might sound very daunting. It might sound very far off to be able to do the kind of things that Dada Rinpoche did or that Susiddhi has done. And nobody's asking you to do that, by the way. I'm not asking you to sell your house and give the money to the Buddhist Centre. I don't want you to do that. That's not why I'm telling their story. But it's just, for me, a very inspiring example of what's possible, what the kind of heart that a human being can cultivate with practice. And it begins by just doing small things, small opportunities where we can give to other people, and just developing this heart and this attitude where we begin to care more about others and less about ourselves. The attitude of the Bodhisattva. So in the Bodhicharyavatara, there are chapters on each of the paramitas, and in the weeks to come, we'll be looking at each of the paramitas, each of these things we can train in. And they're very practical things that we can train in right now and will benefit us and transform our experience in our life right now. But they also lead us beyond. Paramitas are ways to the beyond this current way of experiencing the world, and they can lead us into the way that a bodhisattva experiences the world, into the heart of a bodhisattva, which is the heart of Buddhism. And in his chapter towards the start, well, there isn't really a chapter on dharna, which is strange because it's so important. Why is there a chapter on all the other paramitas? And there isn't a chapter necessarily on dharna, on giving. But what Shantideva does instead is just evokes this attitude of wanting to give oneself to other beings, this heart of wanting to give oneself to others. So I'll read some verses. And you might recognise them. Some people have been around for a while because these are verses that we recite in our puja, in our ritual, where we try to cultivate. We kind of try to aspire to this heart of a bodhisattva through the puja. So these are some verses about Shantideva describing the bodhisattva path. Enlightenment is giving away everything, and enlightenment is my heart's goal. So let me give everything away to sentient beings. I give myself to sentient beings. May I be the doctor and the nurse for all beings until the world is cured. May I be food for the hungry and wealth for the poor. May I be a protector for the unprotected, a guide for the lost, and a boat to the other shore. May I be a lamp for those who need light, and a bed for those who need rest. May I be a servant to all beings, just like the earth, water, fire, and air, that are useful in many ways to the beings throughout infinite space. So may I too support the life of all beings until we are all liberated. So for me, what I haven't said yet, and I think what I'd like to say is I just find it really, really beautiful, this ideal that you can develop a heart where you care that much about other beings. I think it's the most beautiful thing you could do with your life, I think, is to train yourself in this way of living, this way of being, that you care so much about other people. I love the Bodhisattva ideal. And I think these verses are really, really beautiful and inspiring to me. But I've got friends who don't like the Bodhisattva ideal, and I've also got friends who find, because I can be quite very idealistic at times, but it can be seen quite daunting to be presented with these really kind of lofty ideals, the goal of Buddhism. And it's important to remember that it's very, very practical, just very, very practical steps, the paramitas. You can train yourself in all of these, and you can take the next step to become a little bit more generous, a little bit more open-handed, and a little bit less kind of closed-fisted, tight-fisted. How can you just kind of tease, like one finger open? Gradually we get our whole palm open. How can we develop that attitude? What's the next step? So anyway, that's what I'd like us to close with and go into the groups with is, well, what might be a next step for you? Is there a practical thing you could do in the week to come to practice generosity, to cultivate this attitude of generosity? So you could think about the attitude of the Bodhisattva. What can I give to this situation rather than what can I get out of it? A quick story, a quick anecdote about Christmas holidays. So I've just come out of 2 weeks of childcare. I've got young children, and my wife works she is a doctor for people who are sick. I had to talk about it. She is a doctor, so she was looking after people who are sick, and I was looking after our children for a couple of weeks. And the first week, I was really grumpy about it. I just kind of I wanted not to be looking after my children for 2 weeks, and I felt resentful about it, that I was having to cover both of the weeks. We didn't have, it's a bit embarrassing, but I was really grumpy about it. And that was unpleasant for me. It was unpleasant for me. It was unpleasant for my kids, I imagine. And it was unpleasant for my wife to come home to me being in a bad mood. And after there was disappointment. We thought we were going to have them stay at the grandparents for a couple of nights. That didn't work out. The kids refused to do that. So there was kind of the second week was another full week of me looking after them. And my wife said to me, I can't cope with you being in a bad mood, as well as having to do all this stuff I'm doing. And I thought, I need to not be in a bad mood. And so it was this attitude of, it was about me. I was stuck in this kind of prison of self-centeredness. It's about me. Well, I don't want to be looking after the kids. I want to be with my mates at the Buddhist Centre. I want to have a break. I want to be able to, and it's not, in a way, it sounds terrible because I love my kids very much, obviously. I know we had a great time together, but I had this sense of resentment that kind of tainted it for the first week. But the second week, after being admonished in that way and kind of told off, suddenly I thought, I'm going about it completely the wrong way. Like, what can I give myself for this week? And I loved it. I had a much better time. Just like, how can I managed to fit in loads of housework. I got loads of stuff done to help my wife out. The kids did loads of stuff they wanted to do. It was just a completely different experience that second week, just by changing my attitude around to more towards, well, what can I give to this situation? How can I be a benefit rather than, I'm not getting what I want out of the situation. So maybe think in that terms, is there a way that you can change your attitude in the week ahead towards, well, what can you give to a situation rather than what can you get out of it? And just notice what happens if you do that. Or you might think in terms of the list of the different ways that you can give. How can you give in the week ahead in one of these ways? So we'll go into the groups and explore generosity, and I'd like to encourage you to take something away practical that you'll work on a next step in the week ahead and see what happens, because it's magical. Generosity is magical. Okay, thank you. So, we'll go into our discussion group.